I'm Hussein, Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign Trade Union Officer, also joined by Gabby from SPSC. For more than 50 years, the Swedish Dockworkers Union has built a reputation on independence, militancy and democracy, but also solidarity and the courage to act on principle. Formed in 1972 by dockers expelled from the General Transport Union, they've always stood with workers and movements around the world, from Chile to South Africa and to Palestine. That spirit of solidarity is being tested again today. On the very same day earlier this year that the Labour Court approved the SDU's planned boycott of military shipments to and from Israel, the union's vice chair, Erik Hegelson, was dismissed, accused of breach of security and disloyalty. And the fight for Erik's reinstatement continues. So thank you for joining us, Erik, to talk about what's happening, the values that drive the union, and why standing together still matters on the docks and beyond. Gabby will lead the conversation, which I'm sure will be of great interest to trade unionists and the solidarity movement in Scotland as we work to build our own culture of effective workers' action. So over to you, Gabby.
Right. Thank you again, Erik, for being here. So I just want to start asking you if you could briefly describe SDU work and its role as an independent dock worker union in Sweden.
Yeah, the SDU was founded in 1972 because of a clash within the Confederation. During the late 60s and 70s, the developments within the Confederation, the LO, the General Confederation for blue-collar workers, was that there was a process of centralization. Is that an English word, or did I make it up? No?
That's good, yeah.
Yeah, centralization. And that came in different forms. But for the dock workers, the main objections were around the fact that the negotiating officers were directly elected by the membership before that, all the way back to the beginning of the 1900s. But they were to be replaced by ombudsmen, which I think is a word that we kind of exported. But the ombudsmen were not directly elected by the dock workers or any other group of workers. They were appointed or employed by the national board of each union. And that meant, in the Swedish context, that the number of candidates was limited because the dock workers had a very different tradition. The Social Democrats, I think, was the most popular party, but we had elected officers in the big ports who are non-party affiliated or were affiliated to the left party or the communists or even the Farmers' Party or the centrist party. And those were never up for appointment as ombudsmen. So that was a big thing. The other thing was membership involvement in decisions. So centralization meant that the right to decide on bargaining results or industrial action was also centralized. There would be no more referendums, and the locals, which were represented in every port, were to be merged into, I think, 3 big regions. And so people couldn't physically participate anymore, because in the north they had to travel 300 kilometers just to get to the meetings. And back in those days, that was impossible. So there was this big debate within the Confederation and amongst the transport workers. And in the end, the dock workers in the north of Sweden refused to join or comply with these new directives, and they were thrown out of the union. And because of a lot of historic criticism against the national leadership of the Confederation and the Transport Workers Union, a lot of the big ports in the south joined the workers who had been thrown out of the union, and they founded a new one. So basically, the Swedish Dockworkers Union is a union based on, we're very conservative, is one way to put it. We still apply those old statutes where we have direct membership referendums on bargaining results and industrial action. The members elect the negotiators on all levels, and we're not affiliated to any party. So this is a very unique thing in the Nordic setting, which doesn't have a lot of independent unions. And historically, most of the independent initiatives, so to speak, are yellow unions or employer-based. So we're kind of the only one left, which is actually an organic trade union for dock workers. And we organize dock workers in some 20 ports up and down the coasts. And we're the majority union in a lot of those ports, including some of the biggest ones, Gothenburg, Stockholm, Malmö, all the ports in the north, and so on. So that's basically who we are. And out of that tradition came, in the early years, we were kind of isolated because the Confederation, the LO, didn't want any splinters or independent unions to form. So even the workers in the immediate area of the ports were banned from collaborating with the dock workers. So they sought support outside of the country. In the beginning, the most important countries were the Nordic countries and Great Britain. We had a lot of contacts with dock workers in Hull and so on in the early years. But that also meant that we created a tradition of international outreach and also trying to do what we could to act. For example, boycotting Chile during the military regime or the takeover of Pinochet, and also very early actions against apartheid. So we're a small union when it comes to people, because the dock workers are pretty few. But we had some bargaining power, but the most important role we've played in international matters is that we're always the first ones out, so to speak. And thereby we can push other unions to act or debate different issues. And so, for example, in time, the boycott movements against South Africa grew within the trade unions. And in the last years before Nelson Mandela was free, the whole confederation was involved, even though we're not part of it. So that's a tradition we're very proud of.
Okay, so that leads to the next question, which is, like your involvement in international solidarity. And if you can tell us a little bit about SDU's involvement in solidarity actions related to Palestine. How did that happen? And what led the union to vote for a blockade now in 2025 of military cargo to and from Israel? Was that a decision that was driven by membership, or it was driven by leadership and then it went the other way? around. Can you explain the ethical and humanitarian considerations that guided the union through these actions, to take these actions?
Yeah. Well, historically, the union has had opinions on Palestine and Israel for over 50 years, of course, but in later years, what we did was back in 2010, we had a membership initiative starting in the port of Gothenburg, where a number of dock workers wanted to volunteer to help the first flotilla to break the siege on Gaza. So a lot of members were involved, me as well, but not in a leading function, just to trying to load Swedish cargo that had been collected, generators and other stuff that were supposed to go with the flotilla to Gaza. And yeah, that kind of meant that the membership, or part of the membership, was very invested in those ships. And when they were boarded and Israel killed, I don't remember how many, 8 people or something like that, or 6 or 8, I don't remember. But there was a very strong reaction. But I was in the national board at that time. We never, we reacted on instinct, which meant that we were already gathered when this news broke, and we decided then and there within the national board to take action. So in 2010, we had a 10-day blockade of all Israeli cargo going to and from Israel. This is important because this was politically, it worked out fine, but internally it was a great fuck up on our part, because we sidestepped our own internal traditions of membership referendums and so on to win time, and we acted on instinct, which meant that we had all these tensions. I would say there was a firm majority supporting the action, but the opposition had a very good argument that why did you not let us vote on this? And that dragged on for, I don't know, maybe a year afterwards. We had all these internal debates, people who are not particularly pro-Israel, but just wanted to stay out of politics, or so thought that the issue was sensitive, objected to the decision. The membership was involved in a referendum, but that was taking after the fact, so to speak. The referendum took place after we had already given notice about the blockade, which meant that it kind of became a vote on whether or not the national board had the support of the membership. So it felt a bit skewed, or yeah. We didn't handle that well, and that meant that when this war in Gaza started, there were immediate reactions. Just before in 2022, I think, when Russia stepped up its invasion of Ukraine, a lot of the members reacted, and there were local initiatives in the southern ports of Halmstad and Malmö, where the membership asked the national board for a vote on taking action against Russian ships. So when things developed in Gaza, a lot of the members thought that, yeah, this is kind of, we did the blockade of Russian ships. The next step is to, yeah, hold the line and do the same with Israeli cargo. But this time we had a very different strategy, because we knew that there would be a lot of pushback. You know, in 2010, a lot of the national leadership, I wasn't vice president back then, got death threats, and yeah, people were not prepared for the kind of level of animosity or threats that were coming in. So this time we had a long internal debate, and then we did everything in steps, which took a lot of time. We got a lot of shit from different left-wing groups that we kind of, sometimes you get the feeling that they think they own the union. The union is not affiliated to any party or any group. And the membership, I would say, is not, I'm not sure there's a majority of dock workers who even vote left wing at this point. But that doesn't change the fact that we have a tradition within the union where people, you know, even if they see party politics in a certain way, they are able to act in solidarity on other issues. So, but we got a lot of slack this time because we were slow to react and so on. But we kind of persisted and just let the debates go on, moving into the National Assembly that we had in November last year. And back then, the participants decided on a motion of whether or not to call a referendum and try to block Israeli military cargo. The question was actually to block all military cargo involved in the conflict, which would have meant, of course, that if Sweden supplied Hamas forces with weapons, we would have blocked that as well. But, you know, it's a non-issue, but important to some members. And yeah, we had a what's it called in English? Closed vote. You know, you vote in an urn, not by raising your hand, in order to let people express their will more freely. But we still had a massive majority to call the referendum. We did so before Christmas sometime, and the results came back, I think, in January. I kind of lost track of time, but I think 68% of the membership voted to take action. And this time they did it knowing that there would be pushback and there would be a lot of shit in the media and so on. And I think that's something I'm pretty proud of on a strategic level, because the initiative came early on from members, individual members, and some locals, but we kind of let the process take its course, because we knew that if we rush it, then we can't carry it out as we want to. Yeah, so that's the background. And then we kind of went public with the vote and the outcome of the referendum, which created massive media attention and a lot of debates, which was basically my responsibility. So I did all these debates with former combat pilots and all these bloggers and stuff and all the national newspapers and shit. But yeah, it was fine. And the death threats were much fewer this time, which I think is an indication of something.
And did you notice any difference, like any palpable difference between taking action against Russia and taking action against Israel? And in terms of media and public perception, how was that? How was it navigating like community support? Was there wider community support for the blockade in 2025? How did the employers react?
Yeah, in comparison, I would say the big thing with the Russia blockade was that it split the political right. So some parts of the right supported our action, and the other one thought that we were intervening with Swedish foreign policy and so on, and we should just stay quiet and keep out of politics. But there was a very obvious split in that, which made it easier. But when in terms of the employers, they were very aggressive even back then, even if public opinion was very firmly on our side and questioning why the government wasn't acting. You know, they had all these very dramatic rhetoric and defending Europe and all that shit, but we were still buying from Russian oligarchs and thereby kind of sustaining the machine behind the war. But the employers reacted as if we were kind of interfering with their right to run their businesses. So they were very aggressive. They took us to court 2 times. The first time, they actually settled. They brought us to court with a big claim or a big fine that they wanted to get out of us, but the public reaction was so fierce that they backed down. So they put their fine at 0 Swedish crowns. So they took us to court. They wouldn't back down on principle. We should stay out of this and this should be forbidden and so on. But they didn't even have the guts to, push for damages. And we settled that case by saying, okay, we might wind the industrial action down, but it will take us 14 days. And they agreed. So legally, they were as aggressive as they were with the Palestine issue. But publicly, they were much less aggressive towards the union, because they knew that public support was not as divided. When it came to this time around with blocking Israeli military cargo, our concept going into it was that we thought Sweden is a big exporter of weapons, as you might know. We're one of the biggest exporters of weapons per capita in the world. So our thought was that we were probably supplying Israel with arms. What we found out, because we didn't have this knowledge prior, was that the Swedish peace movement had a very different view of what was happening, and that was that Israel was mainly selling arms to Sweden for hundreds of millions of pounds, and that was, really the key factor for them in sustaining the war. So we had to shift our focus, and we were still challenged in court, of course, but it became apparent after a while that this would be a much more practically difficult blockade to carry out, because we couldn't find the cargo. And there are all these laws that regulate to what degree you can actively search for military cargo, or trying to map it out and so on. And we didn't want to go into any legal traps, so we just stayed out of it. And in the last weeks before we effected the blockade, we tried to be very transparent with the Palestinian trade union movement that this would mainly be a symbolic action. If we actually stopped a ship or a container or something like that, it would be more by chance than that we had prior knowledge about, the way it works. And also, we found that this cargo was kind of high-tech, physically small, high-tech products that we weren't sure that they were even going on conventional vessels. We thought that they might fly it in or bring it in by military transport. So, yeah, but compared to Russia, I would say when it came to Gaza, there's always people saying that the unions shouldn't do this and that, should stay in their lane. And these are the same people who say once you actually fight for something workplace related, better pay, better working conditions, safer working conditions, they say that the union shouldn't be involved in those issues either. So we don't really care too much, but when the right is less and less pro-Israeli in the Swedish context, but still very much opposed to doing anything in order to stop the genocide or kind of limit what Israel can and will do. So I think we had strong public support for this blockade as well, but not as strong as when it came to, blocking Russian ships, which was also practically much easier because there were steady flows of cargo, lumber, metals, oil, gas, even bananas, because they brought the Russian imports of bananas came via Sweden. So we had a big fight about whether or not we should touch those ships and so on. But it was much more, what's the English word? Graphic or practically easier to execute. And I would say in the Swedish context, limiting military imports and exports to Israel without state compliance or state cooperation would be very, very hard and would have to involve the whole confederation. So it was mainly a symbolic action when we were about to execute it.
And what would you say about the impact of this symbolic, like the immediate impact of the symbolic actions? And moving forward, what would be?
What it brought to light, which I'm fairly proud of, is that we actually had a month of speaking to all the national media outlets and even the smaller ones that target groups that we normally don't listen to unions about military trade in general, but military trade with Israel in particular. Because I think the Swedish public thinks that we import and export military cargo only to countries that are not involved in active conflicts. So the scale of, for example, these military contracts with Israel and how much Swedish taxpayer money is flowing into the occupation and to the atrocities in Gaza, I think surprised a lot of people. So we kind of moved the needle a bit in the public debate. Practically, it didn't do much. What it did do is that some arms dealers, exporters, who have very little exports to Israel at this point, because this has been winding down for the last 3 to 5 years. They were worried. And they also made public that they're no longer exporting to Israel because they thought it might hurt their brand and so on. And also, it's not a big part of their business. So that makes making a statement much easier. So that what we achieved was, in terms of the public debate, I think it was worth something. Practically, not so much. And I think it might have been a different story if it was, or military trade with Israel was mainly exports. That would have been another issue, because then you have greater prior knowledge of where things are manufactured and where it's going out and so on, and Swedish companies to kind of talk to, or who would have to answer.
And can you talk us through, like, how did that lead to your dismissal notice? How did that happen?
Yeah, this is the kind of the thing we're struggling with, is that the union, the Swedish Dockworkers Union, does not think that my dismissal is really linked to the Israel-Palestine issue. We view it as a kind of, it's just a backdrop for the company and for the employers' organization, but their motivations are much more domestic and related to economic issues. They want to break the union. They're trying. We've kind of been under attack for the last decade now, and we think that they just thought that, as the public opinion in their view was very divided on this issue, it might provide them with a cover for something that they've been planning to do before the Gaza war started this time. So, but what they did in practice is that when we were waiting for the court to publish their ruling on whether our action was legal or not under Swedish law, I worked a whole 5-day streak of shifts on the ships, and on Sunday, which was my last day, Sunday evening, I got a call from our production manager saying, "You need to come down for a meeting tomorrow morning." And I knew from his voice and the whole circumstance that this was bad. Yeah, it kind of stirred up a lot of emotions at the workplace. I work as a full-time dock worker, so the union work is done in my free time, so to speak, or most of it. But yeah, when I came down there, they didn't say much. They just said that I was being given notice about being dismissed on the basis of the National Security Act or something like that, and disloyalty in relation to that act, and they wouldn't say anything else. But afterwards, I asked our CEO if they had filed a police report, because I didn't really know too much about this law, but I thought this sounds like a crime, so that that may mean that this is a police matter as well. And they said they had filed a police report. This is kind of one of the crazy parts, is that the police report was filed, I don't remember, 7 or 10 days before this meeting. So the accusations to the authorities was made long before I was taken out of production. I actually worked 5 12-hour shifts after they filed the police reports, and no one told me anything. After the meeting, we got back to the union, and the company had issued a press release saying that I was fired due to or in relation to being a threat to national security, which is a completely different part of the legislation, which is meant to target terrorists and spies for foreign powers and so on. So that's where it all started. But we kind of knew from the beginning that this has very little to do with the actual blockade, which, but little by little, we found out that they were claiming to, in the police report and other, with the media and so on, that what I had said as a spokesperson for the campaign and for the industrial action was somehow threatening the port's security or national security. In the beginning, they also implied that the military and the Swedish secret police was somehow involved. I've never heard any of those accusations after that, so I just think, you know, they brought out the big guns and then, yeah, nothing came of it. But yeah, it's been a struggle ever since, and I don't really know how to communicate this because the union wants to keep talking about Palestine and the situation in Gaza and why we took this action, which is based on our concept of human rights and defending civilians in any war, but especially in a one that is so genocidal or aimed at the civilian population in order to, yeah, I don't know what, kill them off or just bring them to their knees. But we want to keep addressing this issue, but we don't think that this is what kind of motivates the employer. The employers are motivated by economical factors. They are not dependent on trade with Israel. It's a very, very tiny part of their business, but they want to break the union. And we kind of try to balance this because there's no point in making yourself or the union political martyrs if you don't think that that's what it's all about. But yeah, it's a bit difficult to find a way to approach it.
Yeah, so I was going to ask what did you think the real reasons were behind all of this,
Yeah.
and what does your case say about the wider industrial relations and the climate for union and industrial action in Sweden?
Yeah, I think there was a big uproar when this happened, and we got a lot of support from a lot of unions that normally don't support anything we do, because people reacted and saw this as an attack on the right to organize and the freedom of expression. And yeah, it was kind of obvious from the beginning that this was actually a rigged process and that the employers were maybe even not aiming to win the case in court, but to lose the case and then use a special paragraph in the employment law that allows them to to kind of get rid of workers even if they lose the process in the labor court. So there's a special list with fines depending on how long you've been employed. And we thought from the beginning that is their actual aim, just to go to court, lose the case, and then buy me out. And we know, but we can't prove so far that there have been plans to target at least 2, maybe 4 leaders of the union, dating 1, maybe 2 years back from when this happened, in order to break it, to make people scared, to make people hesitate to take public roles, or even step up to be health and safety officers in their workplaces and so on, because the repression would be viewed as too much for a lot of people. I think it's a miscalculation. It doesn't work like that, and dock workers have a very defiant culture. So if you tell us to go right, we go left. If you tell us to go left, we don't move anywhere. So I don't think long term this will work. But it's still a very tiring and very hard process, because I don't want to be a full-time, union employee or union officer. I need to work in order to kind of have an, what's the English word? Working on the docks means that I get a chance to breathe, not to be like the official Erik repeating the points of the union. I need the day-to-day kind of exchange, that it's not so serious all the time with my colleagues. And they've taken that away from me, which means a lot. It kind of makes it very hard for me to work like I used to, and I can't contribute to the union work like I used to. And that is not, except for that, you also have the practical implications. I can't get into my own port. I can't get into most other ports in Sweden, and I've been around, but I can't get into my own port, which is owned by DFDS, the big Danish company. I can't get into the neighboring port, which is Maersk APM terminal. And that is where I do most of my, day-to-day union work. And most of it is just small scale, supporting members in different issues and answering questions and negotiating small changes, big changes, but I can't contribute to any of it. And that's been kind of weighing down. And as the months go by, the court case drags on. The employer still has to pay me because first they claim I wasn't a union officer of particular significance, which is a thing in the law. They lost that case, so they're still paying me every month like I'm going to work. But the court proceedings are so rough, and also I'm not that afraid of, physical threats anymore like I was in the beginning. When I was painted out as a threat to national security, I was really worried about my kids and my immediate family, because there are a lot of people out there who see themselves as kind of crusaders for protecting the nation and so on. And amongst those people are really crazy ones who will actually do stuff, and that was really, really scary. But I think the whole media campaign kind of backfired for the company. I've never seen any articles, even from the most right-wing papers, saying that this would doesn't look suspicious or strange. So yeah, that threat was more of a problem in the beginning, but now it's a process that wears you down, and I don't want to give them that. But to some degree, it actually works. It's fucking tiring.
And in a broader sense, has this affected the SDU's ability to defend workers and take ethical actions, and how?
To some degree, maybe, but yeah, but it's like saying, when there are layoffs in the port or the volumes of cargo go down, we are also less efficient in other matters and supporting other unions across in the Swedish context or internationally. It's the natural ups and downs of the stuff. Union work hasn't stopped, but yeah, I think we're all right as a union, but it's also the threat of the financial costs of all this. We're a small independent union, and the companies we're fighting are yeah, I wouldn't even say multi-billion. Maersk is even bigger than that. And the FDS is a very large company, and the employers organization has a shitload of money. So that's not on their side. The financial aspect is kind of irrelevant. And for us, it's something I worry about. I don't want to burden the union. But all these legal proceedings will cost us money. At some point, they might cut me off from my employment, even before the court case starts. And yeah, it's so far it's more of a drain on the financial resources than on the personal ones. We still, I don't feel that people got too scared to act in their ports or anything like that. As I said, people kind of go the other way. A lot of if the company starts making threats in any port, people just say, "Oh, so you're gonna fire me like you did with that guy in Gothenburg," or so it's not an efficient deterrent for people participating in union work, but long term, yeah, it will hurt us, but hopefully not too much.
Do you think that sends, what kind of message do you think that sends to other unions and other representatives that want to take independent and bold action and international solidarity? And what lessons can we learn from that?
I don't know. Like in the Swedish context, I don't think the acts of the employers makes the issue of union non-action or passivity an ongoing question, because every time my case pops up in the newspapers or there's a new interview or something else or development from the courts or a new ruling or anything like that, it kind of brings the issue up in other unions, which are very much not related to ours. Teachers union, nurses union. And I think so far, I guess you would have this same issue in the British context as well. For some unions, the military industry is important as an employer. So they want to avoid the issue the issue is very sensitive in some parts of for example, the metal workers union, because they actually have strong unions within these factories that manufacture the weapons that we sell to, not so much to Israel, but to Saudi Arabia and Arab Emirates and so on. and they don't want these discussions to go public. They want to avoid the issue. In other unions, it's kind of a debate where I think the national leadership is very hesitant to do anything that would kind of stir up a real debate within the unions. They are kind of getting very comfortable with the union being regarded more as a assurance company than something that you're actually part of and participating in. So far there have been initiatives in many unions, in national assemblies and congresses and stuff, bringing forward different issues, but mainly boycott, non-compliance, and so on. And they've all been voted down on the initiative of the national leaderships. But I think the tide is slowly turning. And yeah, further on, I think this is not a position that they can maintain, because, for example, the Swedish pension system is basically two parts. One is the public pensions that go into state-run funds, and those are still trading with Israeli companies who are like blacklisted by the UN. But that's a political debate where you have certain right-wing parties in parliament that are actively fighting for these funds to keep investing in Israel. But then you have the other part of the pension system that is the part where the employers pay a certain percentage of your salary to a private company that is owned 50% by the unions, 50% by the employers. And on the blue-collar side, that company is still heavily investing in Israeli companies in the West Bank, and also companies that are affiliated to what's happening in Gaza. And that debate is just beginning in the Swedish context. But there's really, I think that's unsustainable in the long run, because these are actually union-owned companies or union co-owned systems, where it would be very easy for the confederation or individual union to push for something else. And I think that's going to happen further down the line if we can keep the pressure up.
And so Sweden recently joined NATO, right? And how do you think this affects SDU's work as an independent union, especially in relation to boycotting and blockading Israeli goods? And do you see a link between Sweden's NATO membership and these attacks on union activities in Sweden?
Yeah, there is a link when it comes to like the legislation. A lot of the legislation that the employers are now using is actually prior to the NATO affiliation. It's been around, I think the National Security Act, or whatever it's called, it was updated in 2017, which is long before we joined NATO. But with the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine and so on, you kind of had an increased interest. There are a lot of military investments being made, and there's also this concept that military or foreign policy decisions are kind of outside of the democratic realm, or at least the civil society realm. So what they're doing is they're trying to use legislation that is meant to kind of secure different parts of society, railways, docks, hospitals, to kind of circumvent or go around the employment acts that are in place. So they're saying, yeah, we can't really say why we're firing this person, but we've made a security decision based on this and that. Or even more common is that you kind of defer the decision to someone else. You know, the government or a public authority has deemed this person disloyal or just doesn't fit the criteria to keep working here, and there's all these problems related to this which might come up in my case as well. You know, we know why they say I was a threat to national security. That's because I said certain things to newspapers regarding the blockade, and the police and the other public authorities said that this doesn't even, you know, add up for us to start an investigation. This is not a crime. But there's all these clauses and things that they keep referring to, saying this is a matter of national security, so we don't have to motivate this decision, or we don't have to share the background and so on. And I think that is hurting unions in many branches, not just the docks. We struggle with it sometimes. We have another case in court right now where they just say, oh, we didn't fire this person. He just can't get into the port because some other party deemed him unfit because of his background or whatever it is. But this comes up in all aspects of society, hospitals, public transport. You know, they kind of found a new magic tool that gives them opportunities to go around civil rights and National Employment Act and so on. And whether that works out or not is very much up to the labor court. If they say we can't really, we don't have the mandate to kind of overturn a security decision, then the National Employment Act is basically useless. They can always refer to some secret decision that no one has the right to see or overturn. And that would be a very, very dangerous path. And there's a big increase in these cases since we joined NATO. I don't think it's kind of a given, because there's a lot of countries have been in NATO for a long, long time, and they, to some degree, still have employment protection or stuff like that. But it's new, so I think the employers are finding new tools to do what they always wanted to do, which is weaken the unions, get rid of people who they think kind of hamper their ability to make even bigger profits.
And how can you prepare legally to take these sort of actions and to take and for a blockade? Like, how can you preempt all of these issues and prepare workers?
I don't know. I think when it comes to taking action, the only way to prepare workers is taking action. You can't prepare your kind of membership for a strike properly without just having people experience what a strike is like, because a strike is a very special emotional roller coaster. You know, at some points you feel extremely strong and kind of untouchable, and you feel your bargaining power is growing. Then you have the other process when you kind of fear for your employment, your friends' jobs, and you kind of go into a dark place and so on. If you've never experienced it, it's really, really hard. And it's really hard to hold the line. But if you've done it once and you turn up at the same point again, people talk to each other and say, yeah, it always feels like this. But this is, you know, and the employers always communicate like this. Like, we're not going to back down no matter what you do. You know, they project this image of being kind of unstoppable or extremely strong. And once you kind of build up that experience, then you're more you're able to defend yourself in a better way. And I think that's the case with also international action, or you just have to do it once. You can't prepare fully for all the impact because you don't know that beforehand. This time with the action against Israeli cargo, we prepared for a scenario very much like the one in 2010. But except for me being fired, the repercussions was much more manageable. And also because we did it in a proper, slow fashion where the membership had its right to vote, the minority felt respected, you know? Like, people felt we organize everyone. We organize, for example, evangelical Christians who believe that Israel has a very central part of their kind of religious, and so they would never criticize Israel. But after a referendum where the big majority says we should act because they're violating human rights and they're waging war in a way that's totally unacceptable, people are kind of fine with just saying they can go home to their church and say, I voted no, but I'm still staying in the union because it's kind of, it's our tool in the workplace. I agree with a lot of other stuff the union does. And yeah, that makes it much easier to handle respectfully the minority that doesn't want you to kind of do anything. When it comes to the media, I'm not the expert. Amanda in our office runs all the, what should we say, the strategic thinking. But of course, you can prepare in that way. You have to have a message that is not kind of, that appeals to a lot of the membership, not just the ones who are already very much engaged. And also, we try to put everything in the context of the blockade against Russian ships. It kind of follows the same logic. We support human rights. We support human rights everywhere, and we do what we can, you know. Framing it is very important, and not being like dragged into all these debates of a one-state solution or a two-state solution, or just, that's not up to us. We just want this shit to stop, and until it has, we shouldn't be a part of supplying resources or money to the Israeli government or the Israeli state.
And in terms of you know, like public support as well, so in recent years, so Sweden Swedish public opinion has been shifting to the right, I think, like in many countries, right? How do you see that, and how much public support do you still have in terms of Palestine solidarity and taking action? How does that affect your strategy? And do you see ways in which we can maintain a growing support for Palestine international solidarity in a more, despite this right-leaning context? How do we do that? How do you see that happening?
Well, one thing that's very strange in the Swedish context is that there's a lot of people, pundits, news outlets are kind of claiming to know what the Swedish public wants in different issues. And like in all other Western countries, there are a shitload of polls on everything. Should you eat meat more than 3 times a week and blah, blah, blah. But when it came to the issue of Gaza and Palestine and Israel's war, there were no polls, nothing. Now I've seen one, and that one is very obvious that public opinion about the rights of Palestinians has not changed that much. It's just the parties have changed, but the public opinion, even the right-wing voters haven't changed their opinions too much. And I think it's hard to navigate, but in general, I think having a broader approach, not kind of pushing people into a corner where they have to kind of put their foot down. Should this Palestinian organization be seen as legitimate or not? What is the do you agree with the Oslo Accords or not? Blah, blah, blah. Like, having a broader view of things, I think, will help kind of facilitate growing support and long-term support. Not paying too much attention to the extremists. I don't mean that in a very to some degree you have to, but sometimes it just we give them too much credit of kind of heading the opinion. The Swedish far right party, which is kind of the biggest right-wing party in opinion polls at this point. They will probably be the biggest right-wing party after the next election. They have a very extreme view of Israel. They're actually, historically, they're a Nazi party, which developed into something more of the populist brand that is very popular right now. But their views of Israel, even though they kind of came out of an anti-Semitical tradition, is that they're allies, and they're allowed to do whatever the fuck they want. But I'm not sure even their own voters agree with that. So having all these having too much focus on what those people say, it's not that important. We have to try to deflect to the issues of what are those parties doing in power and objecting to that instead of, should probably have, I'm not, I'm not sure how to express this in a more pointed way, but I don't think that the public opinion of or support for the Palestinian people is shifting towards Israel. I think it's the other way around. And this seemed to be happening even within the right-wing parties. So how to handle that politically, I don't know. Sometimes I feel very liberated to be a union activist because I don't really have to have a grand scheme or concept of what we should do on a political level. You can just go back to basics. Why should this be allowed? Why should we not act? We have the ability to do something. Why shouldn't we? I think that's enough from a union perspective. Why should we be contributing to these atrocities and these violations of human rights? And there's no clear answer. 1/5 of the population will say it's very important because we're in this holy war against Islam or whatever it is, but that's irrelevant. They've thought like this even before there were far-right parties. That was the mainstream right-wing party view, and that was the case with apartheid as well. I think if these parties were big in the 1980s, they would have been saying stuff that you kind of, yeah, they would have been much more vocal about trying to suppress the black majority and why that was important for Western civilization and so on. But in practice, it doesn't affect things. The moderate right wingers were still supplying money, weapons, and all this to keep the apartheid regime going all the way up to the end. So sometimes I think we kind of focus too much on the extremes, but we already have like public support. We just have to build on it to reach new groups, and we won't reach the extremists. We need to have another focus.
And speaking of that, so when we see the trade union movement as a whole, and the difference between grassroots and independent unions and the more mainstream unions, do you think mainstream unions in Sweden or elsewhere, do they have that capacity to take radical action and on international solidarity and international issues, and or do you think there are too much constraint into institutional and political pressures to do that? And what kind of changes and how can we inspire as grassroots movements? What kind of changes need to happen for mainstream unions to get along the boat and to act more boldly and on political matters?
I think leading by example is important. That's why if people say, yeah, but you didn't find any Israeli weapons or actually affect military trade with Israel, my response would be, we brought the issue up. We showed others that it's legal within the Swedish context, and we could carry it out. And leading by example is much more powerful than kind of trying to push a debate. So even an independent union or a smaller union can have a big impact. That's important, and that's something we see in Norway, where the Confederation has these kind of boycott. The National Assembly of the Confederation, the LO in Norway, came out in support of boycott, but it's actually not doing anything because the national leadership doesn't want to push the issue. And the Norwegian activists are very aware that this is a multi-phased process. So now they're trying to kind of mobilize from underneath to get initiatives from different unions to do something even locally in Oslo or somewhere else. And that's one step. And you carry that out and you learn from your mistakes, and then maybe the next one will be a bigger one. This is how it worked with South Africa. You know, we were the first ones out back then as well. But it took a long time to get the Confederation moving, but it's possible. And I don't think, like, the concept of trying to kind of break out of the confederations on all levels and starting independent unions based on, you know, the freedom of to take action without, you know, politicians interfering and so on. That's an even slower process. We've been fighting for more than 50 years just to survive as the only kind of living independent union in Sweden, which actually has some kind of power in our branch. So the alternative is even more long term. But I think it can be done. You keep pushing and you keep doing smart things, and eventually, yeah, gradually, the pressure will kind of be too much, so they will start moving. I don't think they can remain passive for too much longer, but from that step onto actual boycott and actual industrial action and so on to push the government to do their part, it's a long way, but yeah, I don't know. There's no shortcuts. You just have to do it.
We've recently seen very strong and massive union action in Italy.
Yep.
By the unions, by the grassroots unions in Italy. How did you view and feel about those initiatives? And do you have any direct contact with Italian unions that are involved in these campaigns?
Yeah, I met them in Oslo a few weeks or maybe a month back. Some of them I know. Let's put it like this. There are different contexts for doing stuff in the Northern Europe and Southern Europe. Southern Europe is based on, like, the right to strike is individual, which means that even if you don't have a big union, if you have a popular initiative, people can participate even if they belong to other unions or don't belong to any union. So you have this strength that kind of, it's more spontaneous is not the right word, but you know, it's kind of, you have temporary power, and it has a lot of advantages. And the Italian dockworkers in Genoa and in other ports have managed this very well. They're smart, they're dedicated, and they built public support. But also they're leading by example. So there's Sigil, the big union in the port of Genoa and somewhere other parts, they kind of follow along because they know that their membership wants to participate. So they kind of feel forced to come along in the end of the process. And then you can have a big impact like that. But it's also, since they lack the resources and kind of long-term stability when it comes to union power, activists everywhere need to look out for these people, because when things calm down, the state or the employers will come after them. This is happening now in Greece, for example, where they blocked the ship, I think, a year ago, and they're now trying to prosecute one of the union leaders, in order to make an example out of him. They blocked the ship with Israeli ammunition or ammunition going to Israel. I don't remember. But it's like in the northern countries, the process will be much slower. But once you move these big, slow giants, it's much more stable as well. And I think one of the main problems amongst pro-Palestinian activists is that they see the unions as something of an institution that they're not part of. They come to us bringing wishes like we're a political party or we're just an organization of workers, you know. We're no different than them. We're not like institutional power or anything like that. And the approach is wrong. People get offended being told what to do because we have this and we have that. And no one gave us this. We have power because we took a lot of shit. People got fired. People suffered a lot to build up union strength. And we have to fight every day, every week to keep it. And also when stuff happens in Southern Europe, like in Italy or in Greece, people come to us and say, why don't you call a general strike? Well, the conditions are very different. If we call a general strike and people actually refuse to go to work without being a member of our union, they'll be fired or at least face court proceedings and a lot of pressure and pay fines and shit. So it's just, and people would know this if they were actually part of the union movement. But there's been this kind of separation where people regard unions as some kind of alternative left-wing institution that they can talk to in order to bring their wishes or yeah. People need to mobilize within their own unions. And in the Swedish context, most people join a union, but they never get active. They don't understand how the union works, and therefore they write letters to the unions, if like writing to a company or an insurance company or something. We have to kind of engage in order to have power to direct the unions.
So are there any strategies that you could think of for solidarity movements such as ours to work around in education and communicating that, you know, workers' rights here at home and all of these international issues are linked and connected? How do we make that work? How can we walk together as workers and activists? How do you see that happening? What's our role?
I don't know. I don't know. Like we're struggling with this because it kind of feels like, almost like a hippie message in 2025. But the Swedish Dockworkers Union has been engaged in human rights and, you know, the protection not only of union rights but in human rights, the freedom of expression, the freedom of against straight repression and so on, because like the human rights situation sets the condition for all other rights. In a world where people can be kind of disregarded as not really human, like the Palestinians are being treated like non-humans or kind of a secondary class of humans where you have to kind of, yeah, their rights can be violated to at least to a degree, because it serves the greater good and so on. If you accept those concepts, the concepts of, for example, trade union freedom, freedom of association, the right to strike, and so on, it will be gone in a generation. In a world where there's no rights for brown people or Palestinian people, all civil rights are threatened. But I don't know how to communicate this in a way. For us, it's kind of organic. It's like, yeah, we don't have to find a trade union angle to everything. We're not just opposed to apartheid because it weakens the bargaining power of the international working class. We also actually believe that people should have certain rights that cannot be taken away, cannot be violated by any regime, by any country. And I don't know how to get that across, but I think a lot of people instinctively think that way still. That's kind of the way we were brought up. Democracy works like this. The people decide, the people elects representatives, but those people who are in power are limited by individual rights. And these are those rights, and they apply to everyone. Well, if they don't apply to Palestinians or Sudanese or whoever, then what's the basis for the other rights, so to speak? I want to live in a world where everything is not up for negotiation all the time. The right to strike has to be kind of fundamental. It's in the constitution, the Swedish constitution, but it doesn't have any worth if all the other things the constitution says can be violated with impunity. People don't react to it. I don't know. What I'm trying to say is that basically human rights has a very bad reputation because it's something kind of feels a bit like something we talked about 20, 30 years ago as a nice concept, but nowadays it's just seen as a philosophical thing. For us, it's very practical. Like, you defend it in order to have rights of your own. No, I'm sorry. I just don't know how to put this into a strategy. But for me, it's like fundamental. It's why would there be a freedom of association or a right to stop work if there's not a right to live or a right to keep your home or a right to not be subjected to collective punishment? I just don't understand how that world would work.
Well, I think you kind of answered that already. My next question would be, what message would you give to union leaders around the world that hesitate to take public action and support ethical and political industrial actions? Is there anything else that you want the public to understand about SDU's support for Palestine and involvement in international solidarity?
No, I think like a general concept that we're working with is that we don't want to be viewed as some kind of martyrs or superheroes, and what people can do to protect workers who actually take a stand is taking a stand themselves. You know, the Italian dock workers, the Greek dock workers, the Swedish dock workers, the South African dock workers, we will all be subjected to repression if we can be isolated. But if the movement grows, if things spread, if governments, even like smaller countries, or are actually doing something, for example, the discussions in Spain and Belgium and so on, they are important because they provide protection for others. And you know, in the short term, we need publicity. We need these cases to be made public, and we need financial support at some time. But what really would protect dock workers and all other workers who actually take action is more action in other branches, in other places. Like that's the best way to do it. And that's also how things usually start. You know, the first ones out get a lot of slack. Some are targeted. But if those unions are isolated, if there's no second wave or third wave with new initiatives, they will be smashed. It will be brutal. But if new initiatives keep coming up, then they might not even go all the way with the first targets. So my message to people who hesitate is just there's a balance here. You can't do everything. You have to have kind of realistic targets, and no union membership is up for picking every fight with every company in every state in the world that actually does shitty things. But after you're prioritized, just give it a try. Do it, give it your best, and even if it's not as successful as you hoped, you provided protection for the next one and the ones before you, because we don't want this to be a dock worker thing, or the whole mythology about dock workers who are kind of brought up to fight against the world and take on all these powerful. It's not true. It's just it's coincidence. It's a lot of other factors affecting this, but the most important thing people could do is just engage in their own organizations, hopefully unions, because I still think they're kind of, it's the organizations that actually have the power to directly hurt the ones who actually run things, which are the rich people and their companies, and engage, build trust, and try to do things on your own. Letters of support are brilliant. They're nice, but yeah, I would much rather see people not having the time to write support letters because they're doing their own shit.
I think that brings me to the end of the questions. Hussein, do you have any follow-ups? Thank you so much, Erik.
Yeah, just to come back in. I mean, I've been taking notes throughout, and it's been an absolutely fascinating conversation, which I found quite inspirational, to be honest. And I'm sure our members and the wider trade union membership in Scotland will as well. I think one of the key points that you repeated was not wishing to be a martyr, and also wanting action. It's about action. And I think it's really important that we take that away, and that, you know, there isn't a magic formula to what you're doing. Most of the problems that you described are very familiar to us, in terms of the, you know, the hesitancy of unions to generally get involved in political stuff, having to take the members with you, even when they will fundamentally disagree with the position you're taking, but they can see that they understand solidarity, and they go along with it. All very familiar to us, and you know, you've set a great example. Of what we can be doing. We can be doing in Scotland, and I think we need to go back and start working hard to emulate that, and the best way to support you, as you say, is by taking our own action, and that's certainly what I think I'll take away from the conversation. So thank you again, Erik.